Welcome back to class again. This section we're going to talk about rational powers. Now before we do that, we should probably remember that rational powers, or rational numbers, is a number that can be written as a fraction. And then we're also going to talk about some roots. So square root is the opposite of a square. Remember, square is when your exponent's 2. We use this symbol, and it's called a radical. Sometimes you'll see it with a little 2 up front. If you don't see it with a number up front, you can always assume that it's a 2. So 2 squared is 4, which means the square root of 4 is 2. 3 squared is 9. Then the square root of 9 is going to be 3. Same thing, 4 squared is 16, so the square root of 16 is 4. 5 squared is 25, the square root of 25 is going to be 5. Now there's an alternate way to write the square root, and that is with an exponent of 1/2. So for example, if I have the square root of 9, that's the same thing as 9 to the power of 1/2. Square root of x is x to the power of 1/2. Square root of xy, I'm going to put xy in parentheses and raise it to the 1/2. Or again, remember I can distribute, so this is x to the 1/2 or y to the 1/2. And same thing over here. This is going to be x to the 4th, y to the 2nd, all raised to the 1/2. I can distribute my exponent, and remember a power to a power means that I need to multiply. So this is x to the 4th to the 1/2, and y to the 2nd to the 1/2. Half of 4 is 2, and half of the squared for the y is 1. But what we're really concerned about is that I can change a square root or a radical to the exponent 1/2. Now there's more than just the square root. There's n different roots. An n root is really just the opposite of something raised to the n power. So it's the same thing as a radical, but instead of having this little 2 that's up here, we can put any number there, and it's going to undo any exponent to that power. So for example, 2 to the 4th is really 16. So if I take the 4th root of 16, my answer will be 2. 3 to the 3rd is 27. If I want to take the cube root, or the 3rd root of 27, my answer is going to be 3. Now here's where those fractions and all of those roots and things really come into place. And that's our radical exponents. Sorry, this should be rational. Rational exponents. For your rational exponents, what that really means is when you have a fraction as your exponent, the top is the power inside the radical. And the bottom is the number sitting outside the root, or the radical. So looking here, this top m, maybe not, maybe I won't highlight it. But we notice the top m becomes the power inside. The bottom, the n, sits as that little number sitting on top of the radical. So the 2 for a square root, the 3 for a cube root, the 4 for a fourth root. So let's look at a couple examples. X to the power of 1/3. So I'm going to draw my radical. The bottom sits outside the radical, right on top. The base is going to go inside, and it's to the power of the top. So if we do that again with a different one, I draw my radical. The bottom goes as the little number in the radical. The base goes inside, and the top number becomes my power inside. So I have the 5th root of x squared. What if there's an x and a y? That's okay. I'm going to do the same thing. I draw my radical. The bottom number sits right in that little bend of the radical. So I have the cube root, or the 3rd root. My base goes inside, and it's all going to be raised to the top number, to the power of the top number. And then if I wanted to, I could distribute the 4 to simplify. So I have the cube root, x to the 4th, y to the 4th. And then last but not least, what if my radical is negative? Well, that's all right. I'm going to do the same 3 steps. I'm going to draw my radical. The bottom number is going to stay positive and go in the little bend. So I'm going to use my 3 again, my cube root. My base goes inside. And I'm going to raise that to the power of this top -2. And then simplify. Remember, we're not allowed to have negative exponents, which means this is really an x squared on the bottom of a fraction, right? And then I can just throw my cube root around that. And I believe that's it for this last set of notes. So remember, we have such things as our square roots and nth roots, and they get rid of their opposite powers, or their opposite is that number's exponent. So a square root's the opposite of a square. A cube root's the opposite of a cube. A 4th root's the opposite of a to the power of 4. We can take them and we can write them with exponents. And then we have our fraction exponents. Let's do one more example of something. What if I gave you the radical and asked you to write it as an exponent. Well, remember, the underneath becomes the base. So I have x. This power becomes the top of my fraction for my exponent. And the little number in the bend of my radical is the bottom. And I'll do one more like this just for fun. The thing underneath my radical becomes my base. The exponent becomes the top of my power. And the piece in the bend of my radical becomes the bottom of my power. That's all I have for you guys. Have a great day. Don't forget to do your quizzes assignments. They're going to be due on Sunday. And I'll see you guys next week.